Surrounded by glaciers and battered by storms, no one would expect to find a desert where water is a mirage and life is a strange exception. Yet there it lies, invisible to every tourist photograph, hidden beneath clouds and volcanic ash, a wasteland so vast and so barren that even the ancient Norse outlaws who fled there barely survived to tell the tale. Iceland deceives the world with spectacular precision. The postcards show emerald valleys dripping with waterfalls, rivers cutting through moss-covered lava fields, geysers erupting in clouds of steam. Travel magazines call it the land of fire and ice, a wilderness paradise where nature performs its greatest theater. But these images capture only the edges, the narrow coastal ring where humanity clings to survival. They never show the truth that dominates the interior, a highland desert stretching across 40,000 square kilometers, where the ground drinks every drop of water before a single blade of grass can grow. This deception begins with the island itself, a geological accident still under construction. Iceland sits directly atop the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, the underwater mountain range where the North American and Eurasian tectonic plates tear apart at a rate of 2 centimeters per year. Every century, the island grows 5 feet wider. Every millennium, another volcano awakens. There are 130 active volcanic systems beneath this landscape, more concentrated geothermal fury than almost anywhere else on Earth. Iceland is barely 16 million years old, a newborn in geological time, and it shows its youth through constant violence. The fire comes first. Magma rises through fissures in the seafloor, building layer upon layer of basalt that eventually breaks the surface of the Atlantic. But fire alone cannot explain Iceland. The ice arrives next, enormous glaciers that cover 11% of the land surface even today. Vatnajökull, the largest ice cap in Europe, sprawls across 8,100 square kilometers, a frozen giant whose weight presses down on the volcanic bedrock below. When these two forces collide, when lava meets glacier, the landscape explodes into something that belongs more to science fiction than to Earth. Subglacial eruptions create floods of biblical proportions, releasing millions of cubic meters of meltwater in hours, carving canyons and scattering boulders the size of houses across black sand plains. The rocks themselves reveal the conspiracy against life. Basalt, the primary building block of Iceland, is among the most porous stones on the planet. It forms when lava cools rapidly, trapping countless tiny air pockets within its dark matrix. Rain falls, snow melts, but the water never pools, never accumulates, never creates the wetlands that might sustain vegetation. It simply vanishes into the volcanic substrate, percolating down through layers of fractured stone until it reaches the water table far below or emerges miles away at the coast in cold, clear springs. The ground has a thirst that cannot be quenched. The Vikings, who first arrived in the late 800s, discovered this cruel irony within their first winters. They named the island Iceland after watching their livestock struggle through seasons when coastal storms battered the fjords, but the highlands remained locked in arid cold. These Norse settlers understood quickly that survival meant staying near the sea, where the North Atlantic current carries warmth from the Gulf of Mexico and deposits moisture along the southern and western coasts. They built their farms in valleys where annual precipitation reaches 2,000 millimeters, where grass could grow thick enough to make hay for the dark months. They never attempted to settle the interior because it offered nothing but death. The geography dictated everything. The coastal ring became the entire habitable zone. Towns and villages clustered along fjords and bays. Roads followed the shoreline. The interior remained unmapped for centuries, a forbidden zone known only through terrifying stories of lost travelers and exiled criminals. This was where Iceland sent its outcasts, men declared beyond the protection of law who had to survive in the highlands or perish trying. Most perished. The few who survived long enough to be pardoned returned as ghosts, thin and wild-eyed, speaking of landscapes where the wind never stopped and the ground never gave. But the coastal myth persisted. To the rest of the world, Iceland became synonymous with green pastures and dramatic coastlines. The geothermal heat that bubbles up through fissures in the bedrock allowed Reykjavik to grow from a handful of turf houses into a modern capital, the northernmost capital city in the world, heated entirely by the volcanic furnace beneath its streets. Hot water flows directly from the earth into homes and greenhouses, making life possible at 64 degrees north latitude. This triumph of human adaptation became the story the world knows, the tale of Vikings who tamed the Arctic through ingenuity and determination. What the world ignores is the shadow. Vatnajökull does not simply sit upon the landscape. It dominates the weather patterns of the entire island through a phenomenon meteorologists call orographic precipitation. When moist air from the Atlantic moves inland, it encounters the massive ice cap, rising to heights of 2,110 meters above sea level. The air rises, cools, and releases its moisture on the southern slopes in torrential rain and snow. By the time the air descends into the northern highlands, it has been wrung completely dry. This creates a rain shadow so severe that parts of the interior receive less than 400 millimeters of precipitation annually, the technical threshold for desert classification. The south coast near Vik drowns in 4,000 millimeters of rain each year. The highlands of Sprengisandur, barely 100 kilometers to the north, receive a tenth of that amount. This is not a gradual transition, but a dramatic collapse, as if someone drew a line across the island and declared that water stops here. The combination of low precipitation and porous volcanic soil creates what soil scientists call edaphic drought, a condition where water scarcity is determined not by climate alone, but by the ground's absolute refusal to retain moisture. Stand in the highland desert of Sprengisandur or Ódáðahraun, and the desolation becomes physical. The wind screams across fields of black sand and jagged lava, carrying volcanic particles that scour exposed skin and turn the air into an abrasive fog. The temperature can drop from tolerable to life-threatening in minutes as storms roll off the glaciers with nothing to slow them. There are no trees, no bushes, barely even the low Arctic shrubs that manage to survive in Greenland or northern Canada. The ground is naked rock and ash, kilometer after kilometer of geological emptiness that looks exactly like the photographs NASA astronauts took during training missions here in the 1960s, preparing for the lunar surface. The astronauts came to Iceland because nowhere else on Earth resembled the dead worlds they would explore. The interior highlands provided the perfect analog for planetary geology, a landscape so alien and so hostile that it could teach them what to expect when no atmosphere, no water, no life softens the raw face of a world still under construction. They walked across lava fields with names like Ódáðahraun, and they understood why the Vikings feared this place. This is the massive, invisible desert that hides in plain sight. While tourists flock to the Golden Circle and the Blue Lagoon, while social media fills with images of waterfalls and geothermal pools, 99% of Iceland's 370,000 people live within sight of the ocean. The interior remains as empty today as it was 1,000 years ago, crossed only by a handful of rough tracks that become impassable for most of the year. There are no permanent settlements in the highlands, no farms, no villages, just emergency huts spaced dozens of kilometers apart for those brave enough to attempt the crossing. The desert persists because the fundamental conditions never change. The glaciers will continue to create rain shadows. The basalt will continue to drain water before roots can drink. The wind will continue to strip away any organic matter that tries to accumulate. Climate change may shrink the ice caps, but the porous volcanic foundation of Iceland will remain, and with it, the interior's essential character as a place where water exists only in transit, never in residence. There is something humbling about this geography, something that puts human ambition in perspective. We have built cities in deserts before, from Phoenix to Dubai, forcing greenery and swimming pools into existence through engineering and endless resources. But Iceland's highland desert defeats these impulses not through heat or distance, but through simple geological fact. You cannot water a garden when the ground beneath it is an infinite sponge connected to an ocean of void. The Vikings understood this wisdom in their bones. They did not conquer Iceland, they negotiated with it, accepting the terms the island offered, taking the coastal fringe and leaving the interior to the processes that created it. They knew they were guests, tolerated but not welcomed, allowed to remain only as long as they respected the boundaries. They lived with full knowledge that most of their island was inaccessible, that the green valleys where they raised sheep and grew barley existed only because of a fortunate accident of ocean currents and coastal topography. We have forgotten this humility in our age of climate control and technological confidence. We assume that if a place exists, we can inhabit it, that human ingenuity can overcome any obstacle nature presents. Iceland's interior desert stands as quiet refutation of this assumption. Despite centuries of knowledge, despite modern equipment and satellite weather forecasting, despite every advantage our civilization can muster, we still cannot live there. The land simply will not have us. Perhaps this is the most important lesson a desert can teach. Not all empty places are waiting to be filled. Not all wildernesses are resources waiting to be developed. Some landscapes exist in states that preclude human presence, not through hostility, but through indifference, through geological and climatic conditions that make our needs and desires irrelevant. The highland desert of Iceland does not fight us. It simply absorbs our efforts the way its basalt absorbs water, letting everything drain away into volcanic depths where our plans and dreams dissolve into nothing. So the green coastal fringe will remain the only Iceland most people ever know, and the massive invisible desert will continue to hide beneath clouds and tourist itineraries, a secret emptiness at the heart of an island that seems full of life. The North Atlantic will keep its most paradoxical landscape to itself, a place where glaciers and rain and ocean surround a wasteland as dry as any on Earth, where the very abundance of water elsewhere makes the interior's thirst more profound. Have you ever stood in a place where the geography itself told you to leave? Where every element of the landscape communicated that you were not meant to stay? The highland deserts of Iceland know this loneliness in their stones and their winds, and they have known it since fire first pushed them above the waves.